everybody, part 4. So we're going to start in Illustrator now. Instead of being in Lightroom or Photoshop, we're now going to finish the magazine using Adobe Illustrator. Why Adobe Illustrator? Because it simply is the best software for typography. And the magazine cover is pretty much half typography, if not more. So a couple of things here. First off, we want to create a new document. So we're going to go File, New, or Command-N on the Mac, Control-N on the PC. And in terms of sizing, I know that previously when we talked about this project, like way back, we talked about 16 by 20 being the size, or maybe it was even bigger, like 24 by 36. And that's great if you're using an SLR camera and like big lights and like fancy lenses, because your photograph is going to be really big and high res. And that's just simply not the case with a cell phone photograph. So we're going to make it a smaller document so that if and when we decide to print these, they will still look really good, right? If we tried to print like a really big photo based on a cell phone based photograph, it would likely look a little bit lower quality. And I don't think it would really honor the work that we're doing. So let's use an appropriate size so that it will look as good as it possibly can. And I think that the sweet spot is 11 by 14. So we'll go ahead and create that document. You'll see I've got this like white document here in its own tab. I'm actually going to click back here to this previous document I already had open, which is the same size, only I've got my inspiration images here, which I highly recommend having at all times with you in the document. They're just going to be visual cues, design reminders for you. They're doing all the things that we want to learn from the best in terms of how we use the 4 fundamentals of design, which we know are contrast, repetition, alignment, and proximity, right? So in these 4 here, or in these 5, I've got all those things happening, as you would hope. If it's a professional designer, they should be doing those things very well. And we want to be looking at those and thinking, well, what can I pull from these magazines that I could apply in mine? I've got 2 sports ones here with pro football and triathlon, and then I've got GQ on the left. My image, as you remember from the earlier demos, was like sort of, it was a very posed look in terms of being inside, but it had the skipping rope. So obviously there's like an activity aspect to it, a sort of sports aspect to it. So I definitely want to look at some things that maybe these 2 do. And then I just sort of thought it would be nice to have a contrasting design approach with more of a fashion magazine and see what I could pull from those 2. But what I found has worked over the years is to get the biggest elements put down on the page first. And in our case, and in a magazine cover, it's going to be the photograph and the masthead, right? The masthead we know refers to the name of the magazine. So what we'll do is we'll place the photo. So we're going to go up to File. We're going to click on Place. And in here, we're going to go and find our image. Yeah, okay, there it is. And I just hover over that and I can see that it is a TIFF file, which is how we saved it in Photoshop. And I'm going to place this. All right, it's going to just give me this little hover, strange little icon here. And I'm going to click once, and now it's going to place the image, okay? And I can actually stretch this a little bit here. And if I zoom in, I'll be able to see that the selection worked pretty well, actually. It's a pretty clean selection when we cut out the background. A couple of things I'm going to have to keep in mind are going to be like, well, how much of the subject do I want to be in the photograph, right? And you can sort of see in these ones here that there's many ways you can crop. You can have like a crop that goes like sort of head, torso, and a little bit of like the lower body, like in this football piece here. Obviously, this is not going to work. The triathlon piece here, seated on the floor. You've got almost a full body here with just like a little bit of the shoe being clipped off, 3/4, and then the Matt Damon with like sort of like the mid-torso crop and a little bit of the head being cropped off, which is sort of happening in all of these. Interesting, not accidental, right? So they're looking at cropping in a little bit tighter to the head so that we focus on the facial features a little bit more. And it just reminds us that there's no rule that you need to show space over top of the head. You can definitely crop in tighter and it can work quite well. It really just depends on like where you want the spacing and the emphasis to be. All right, so in my case, I am actually going to try using a little bit of an off-center position, right? I actually don't want to have the figure taking up the center so much, right? So I'm going to have the figure here just a little bit on the side, And what I'm going to do next is go over to my layers panel and really start to think about how I organize my layers. Okay, and I'm going to drag this tab over here and I'm going to look at my layers. And right now, right, it's pretty basic. I've got essentially one layer, which is the photo. And what I'm going to do is actually lock this. So I'm going to lock my photo layer and I'm going to make a new layer down here with the new layer icon. And I'm going to click on that, just double click that. And I'm going to rename this Masthead. Okay, so Masthead is going to be put in here and it's going to have its own layer so that as I start to build up my text, it's much easier to organize things if I have everything labeled. So if I double click on layer 1 and I'll call that photo, that's a good start. All right, so for Masthead, let's go with the simplest cover masthead name that I could think of, which would be skip. Okay, I'm going to type that in. I clicked on the type tool here and then I clicked once. Remember not to click and drag, just click once. I used all caps and I typed skip. Now, obviously it's super tiny. You can't even read it. So what I'm going to do is click on the black arrow. It's going to get a little bounding box around it. And now holding shift, I'm actually going to stretch that out. Okay, and now I've got obviously like a much bigger piece of font. However, it is in Myriad Pro, which we know is like a default Adobe font, which we would try to avoid. Let's go with something that's a little bit, it's got a little bit more character to it, something that sort of fits the look of this magazine. I'm going to try Futura Bold and see how that looks. Here's Futura Bold. All right, that's nice. That's got obviously like a lot more emphasis to it. It's a heavier font. It's a better display font. And its biggest issue right now, obviously, is it's sitting over top of my subject. All right, so if we want to reposition that, we simply go into layers and drag that layer underneath the photo. Okay, and now we've got a very similar effect as to what they have in those GQ issues. Now, the only thing that I think I'm going to argue is a little tricky here is how much of the letter is hidden and how readable it is, right? Because Skip is obviously a fictional magazine. People don't know it and they're not looking for that word. So we have to make sure that our readers can actually make sense of the letters that we're sort of asking them to read and to understand when they kind of go, what's this magazine about? Okay, it's about a guy that has a skipping rope. And if they look at our masthead, we can see, oh yeah, and it is called Skip. So clearly this is a magazine focused on skipping. Where do I subscribe? Okay, so I'm kind of looking for that balance. And I think it's just the littlest details that really help. Like by having the letter P here actually come out, like the ascending downstroke on the P there, that really helps, right? Because if it was totally hidden behind my head there, this ends up looking like a smaller D perhaps, or maybe just not being readable at all. So just having a little bit of like the downstroke on the letter P, that really helps us to read that, okay? All right, so we've got our photo put in there. We've got our masthead. I don't think I really love the color here, so I'm actually gonna click on that. I'm gonna hit the eyedropper tool, or I on my keyboard, and I'm actually gonna go and eyedrop some of the colors that are actually that already exist in the photo. So I'm gonna get some nice color harmony by doing that. So I clicked on the hair color, I clicked on the rope, I clicked on the sweater, and I kind of keep coming back to the rope. I just feel like that nice red color, it just seems like a really good opportunity to look for some unity, right? And when we talk about unity in design, we look for similar elements that help to tie a piece together, right? Red rope, red masthead, pretty happy with that. All right, so we'll stop there for this part. And in the next part, we're going to look at adding some of our cover stories, as well as the little stories known as like the kickers and other details that we can add to the magazine.